This is Floss Weekly. I'm Doc Searls. Coming up next is a really great show with James Vasile, who is working on decentralizing social everything. He's involved in a whole bunch of projects. He's an old friend of mine, and he is really, really good. And my guest on this, our guest host, is Jonathan Bennett, who asks a lot of great questions. And so does my wife, calling in on the side. So it's all good. That's coming up next.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
This is Floss Weekly episode 650, recorded Wednesday, October 6th, 2021. Decentralizing Social. This episode of Floss Weekly is brought to you by Melissa. The U.S. Postal Service processes more than 98,000 address changes daily. Is your customer contact data up to date? Try Melissa's APIs in the developer portal. It's easy to log on, sign up, and start playing in the API sandbox 24/7. Get started today with 1,000 records cleaned for free at melissa.com/twit. Hello again, and good morning, good evening, good whatever it is, wherever you are. I am Doc Searls, and this is Floss Weekly. This week, joined by Jonathan Bennett himself, who just put that Doc. Jacket on and made himself all pretty for us this morning.
I started off, and Doc goes, "Man, you look rough today." I'm like, "Well, give me a second." I put the jacket on.
I said, "You look." I said, "You look roughed up." You look like you have a child, and you probably do. So that's
two of them.
Two of them. Yeah, that'll wear you down. That'll do the job. So you're home in Oklahoma, I assume.
Yeah, I call it the corporate headquarters. It actually is starting to look pretty good behind me. But yeah, it's just it's a converted garage actually, but here in Lawton, Oklahoma.
Well, I'm in an unconverted basement in Bloomington, Indiana, right now, which is where I'll be for the next year, and with a few breaks now and then. So our guest this morning is James Vasile, who's an old friend of mine and probably a new acquaintance for you. Have you followed anything that he's up to there? He sent us a lot of links, which is good.
He did. I don't know that I was really familiar with his work until preparing for this show. But that said, he seems to be working with a lot of things that I care about. So I'm really interested to pick his brain about things like the Fediverse and Mastodon and Matrix and all of those different efforts that are out there. Those things being, open sourced social networks. And I think that's a really interesting thing. Yeah,
same here. And I've always been interested in what he's doing. I met him over, I think, he'll correct me later on this if I'm wrong, on the Freedom Box. And with the Freedom, what happened to the Freedom Box? So that's another topic we can get into. But first, I have to let you all know that this episode of Floss Weekly is brought to you by Melissa. Having accurate customer address data is crucial for the success of your business. Did you know that nearly 36 million address changes were processed by the USPS in 2020? That's a huge chunk of customers you could be missing out on. 30% of customer data goes bad each year, and Melissa can help make sure your data is current and accurate. Melissa's tools have helped businesses maintain fresh data for over 35 years, which explains why over 10,000 businesses trust the address experts. Melissa has a renewal rate of over 92%, proof that companies love Melissa, and you will too. You can verify addresses, emails, phone numbers, and names in real time with Melissa. Melissa's global address verification service verifies addresses for 240 plus countries and territories at the point of entry. Tired of having duplicate customer information in your database? With Melissa's data matching, you can eliminate clutter and duplicates, increase accuracy of the database, and reduce postage and mailing costs. Get the information that completes your customer profiles better. Add customer demographic info to your records, such as marital status and social media handles. Melissa's flexible deployment options offer different platforms to suit any preference, business size, or budget. With flexible on-premise web service, secure FTP processing, and software as a service, that's SaaS, delivery options. Melissa also has their new Lookups app on iOS and Google to search addresses, names, and more at your fingertips. Melissa continuously undergoes independent security audits to reinforce their commitment to data security, privacy, and compliance requirements. Those include SOC 2, HIPAA, and GDPR. Melissa's Global Support Center also offers 24/7 world-renowned support if you sign up for a service-level agreement. Inquire today. Melissa is still supporting communities and qualifying essential workers during COVID-19. See if your organization qualifies for 6 months of free service by applying online at melissa.com. G2 CrowdFall's 2021 report ranked Melissa as a leader in both address verification and data quality software, so you know they are meeting the diverse needs of their customers. Congratulations to Melissa. Make sure your customer data is up to date. Try Melissa's APIs in the developer portal. It's easy to log on, sign up, and start playing in the API sandbox 24/7. Get started today with 1,000 records cleaned for free at melissa.com/twit. That's melissa.com/twit. Okay, so we have a great guest with us here today, James Vasile. I'm going to read down his bio here, and normally I try to compress these, but it's so good. He's been working on helping people to gain control over means of communicating for a couple decades, working on free software, secure communication. I don't have to read that one over, and decentralization. He was part of the team at the Software Freedom Law Center, where his work included the Freedom Box project. He founded the Open Internet Tools project, which built community infrastructure for open source secure communication tools. Open ITP founded and grew into the Internet Freedom Festival, as well as the Localization Lab. He serves on the boards of the Electronic Frontier Foundation, Brave New Software, and Horizons Media. His main project is the Decentralized Social Networking Protocol, where he runs dsnp.org, an open source project trying to break users out of social silos. And that's just a short version. So welcome to the show, James.
Hey, good to be here. It's nice to be talking to you.
Yeah, good to be talking to you too. So let me just start with one that I was talking about at the beginning of the show. What happened to the Freedom Box? Is it still there? Is it still a thing?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, the Freedom Box project is still going strong. They have a team of people working, bunch of volunteers working in several different countries. They do monthly open meetings in real time that you can dial into if you kind of want to catch up on the latest of their work. And you can actually buy a Freedom Box from a web store that will send you a physical box you can plug into your network, and it will provide a bunch of useful services to you. The current iteration of the Freedom Box is a home server that you can plug in and run a lot of the communication services that people use. You can run them as self-hosted versions. So it's sort of like a box with pre-installed self-hosted versions of a bunch of popular software, server-side software. And so you can run chat servers and lots of communication protocols through that thing. And, a bunch of people are using it. A bunch of people have freed themselves from a lot of more centralized incumbent online services and shifted some amount of their communication over to this, bringing communities with them that they then take care of in a self-service kind of way, as opposed to a using somebody else's service and paying with your privacy kind of way.
Hey, James, I'm curious. I see a picture of hardware, and at first glance, I thought, oh, well, it's just they're using a Raspberry Pi and they're putting their spin of Debian or Ubuntu on it. But is that actually some custom hardware?
I think the Freedom Box runs on a few different platforms these days, and I haven't been involved with the project personally in a few years, but I do keep up with them and just read their updates. I know that when we started, the target platform was not the Raspberry Pi, because the Raspberry Pi wasn't what it is today. I don't even know if the Raspberry Pi was around. The first target was something called the Guru plug, and it was this yellow and black plug server, they were called at the time. And the idea was that it was a small enough server that it just kind of had a couple prongs hanging off it, and you could plug it directly into the wall. And that that was a box that we booted Linux onto and then ran from there. So once we were targeting that platform, a bunch of other kinds of small plug servers existed at that time as well. We were targeting some of those, and the Raspberry Pi obviously came along and changed the game for everybody. So I think the idea here is not, hey, this is a thing for Raspberry Pis. I think the idea is that this is a thing you could run pretty much anywhere Debian runs. Because from the very beginning, the whole point of this was it's just Debian with some packages and some config. And so if it runs Debian, it should be able to run FreedomBox packaging and get up and running and get a bunch of these services up. And obviously, Raspberry Pi is the big place for people to do that, but it's certainly not the only place people could do that.
All right, very good. So rather than dig into that, if that's not what you're currently working on, I'm curious, what's keeping you busy these days? What's the newest neat project that you're working on?
Yeah, so I'm working with a group of people over at Project Liberty on something called the Decentralized Social Networking Protocol. And that's been taking the bulk of my time in the last few months, is just trying to figure out how to help them go from a vision for a decentralized social media world, a decentralized social networking world, to go from a vision of that to actually building infrastructure that people can adopt and moving the world away from the current silos. And I'm working really at the protocol level, which is to say the approaches we've seen in the past have really focused on, let's build a app. Let's build a website, right? Diaspora was an attempt at a federated solution that was like all encompassing. It was the whole stack. And you've seen a bunch of competitors sort of come along over the years that have tried to say to everyone, hey, world, come move over to my thing, and everything will be better once everyone moves over to my thing. It turns out that's really hard. Convincing several billion people to do the same thing all at once turns out to be harder than we thought. There was some real idealized thinking, some real magical thinking in the notion that you could sort of get 3 billion people to dump their old accounts all at once and move. And of course, moving people piecemeal is really difficult as well, because there's a certain stickiness to being on the incumbent social media sites where you have your network, you have your friends. A lot of people would like to leave some of the sites they're on, but they don't want to never talk to their cousins again. They don't want to have to rebuild their social network. And the missing piece in our mind turns out not to be the user-facing piece, turns out not to be the website that lets you talk to your friends. The missing piece turns out to be portability, turns out to be escape from lock-in. And the support for that really comes at an infrastructure level. And the fact that we don't have it is a bunch of missing infrastructure. So it's not just that people are using proprietary websites and those websites come with lock-in. It's that any solution that anyone wants to propose to this problem is largely still the old model of, hey, let's get everyone to move all at once to something new. And that's largely because we're missing this infrastructure. And there are some new projects that are trying to fill that gap, that are trying to be that infrastructure so that we don't have to move everybody at once. We can kind of build portability in at a base level and start moving people over when they want to go in chunks that are worthwhile chunks to move. But then over time, that accretes into a mass of people that will be generating the kinds of network effects that the old sites currently do. So that's kind of the idea here, is just if we start at the protocol level, allow anyone to use that same protocol, right? Have that protocol as an open source standard, as open source code and an open standard, we can make it available to way more people and shove it into a lot more domains that will have it reach a lot more users, but also not require all the users to move at once.
So how is this related to the Fediverse, things like Mastodon? And there's a group of these user-facing applications that all uses a very similar protocol. I believe the current iteration of that is called ActivityPub, and it's got some pretty decent support behind it. Are you guys trying to do the successor to that, or how do those projects interact?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, ActivityPub is great. We are using a bunch of the ActivityPub data structures in our work. So, the way ActivityPub has decided to chop up the world and represent data makes a lot of sense to us. It doesn't work that well in, when we can't just sort of take all of that stuff and move it wholesale into our project, because it doesn't translate as well to the blockchain universe on which we're building. So we're taking as much of it as we can. We're trying to do as much interoperation as we can. We're trying to figure out how messages move back and forth across that line, so that if you're in the Fediverse world, you can also be in a more decentralized world and participate in conversations no matter where you are.
So the world that you guys imagine, is it serverless? How does blockchain fit into this?
Yeah, that's a really good question. All of the pieces that we are building are really designed to allow people to have more control over their account and their experience. Right now, when you sign up for a account at Twitter or Facebook or a Mastodon server, your experience is really localized to that one server. We would like the way you interact with your social data, with your social network, to really be kind of like a browser. You can hit a website with a Chrome browser, you can hit a website with a Firefox browser, and you will have two slightly different experiences, but you'll both be able to do the work you want to do in either application. Your social network should kind of be like that, right? There should be this pool of data. There should be a bunch of network connections between you and all the people you know and talk to, and you should be able to send messages back and forth, and you should be able to access all of that from a variety of places. And that means that people can load an app and do their social networking that way on Monday, but then on Tuesday, they could decide to use a completely different app to get a completely different view on that same network. And it might be for niche purposes, right? On Monday, you could care a lot about, Yankees baseball and want to have conversations with people about that and have an environment that is really geared towards that. And on Tuesday, you could care a lot more about knitting, right? And you want a browser of your social network that really is geared towards exposing knitting patterns and helping you figure out better ways to do fiber arts. And that kind of flexibility means that we have to not be serverless, but not be locked into servers. Not be locked into servers even on a moment-to-moment basis, right? So from one day to the next or 1 hour to the next, you should be able to access all of your social activity, not just through this one lens of the application that you happen to have signed up with, this one Mastodon server or this one Facebook server or this one Twitter server. So I wouldn't say that what we're doing is serverless. What I would say is that the goal is to make people a little bit more independent of the servers and to give them control over their own data and their own experience. So they can take that, they can access that data through a different app that meets whatever their needs are and give them that portability so they can choose their experience based on whatever their particular needs are.
So I'm trying to figure out where everything lives then. So if I want to jump on this network that you're describing, do I have to have something like a Freedom Box or a Raspberry Pi where my data is hosted? Where does the person that is me, when it becomes digital, where does that live?
Yeah. So the answer right now is we don't know. There are many places where it could live, and we don't want to be prescriptive about it. So a lot of people are going to sign up for a traditional looking service, and they're going to have a pretty traditional experience where the application that they use is tied to a website, and that website is going to manage all the complexity for them. It's going to store their data, it's going to store their keys, it's going to serve their media, all of that. And I think that's going to be a lot of people. There's a lot of people who don't necessarily want to manage any of that or take control of it. They're perfectly fine in the existing model. And then there will be an awful lot of people who do want more control. And there could be a lot of different models for what that looks like. But bring your own storage, bring your own identity is definitely part of the plan. And the idea here is you say, well, could I buy a Freedom Box? And the answer is yes, of course. If you have a Freedom Box and it is serving content and it is reachable by the internet, the ability for you to designate that as the place where your data is stored and your identity lives should definitely be there. But for users that don't want to do that, the answer might be some combination of some neutral services that they're using, the application that they sign up for in order to access the social network, or it could be a combination of all of those. Could be their phone. There could be a lot of different places where this stuff might end up. And each one of these is a use case that in a decentralized world we could support. So from the very beginning, we're going to support at least kind of that centralized model, and then this bring your own storage, bring your own identity model. What specific buckets people will dream up to put things in, we don't know yet, because we're adding protocols and people will add the things that serve their own needs. And we're not trying to be prescriptive about what that will look like once it finally reaches fruition.
That's that idea that we're not trying to be prescriptive, I think, is maybe how you end up interoperating with other development efforts as well, I would think. Where I want to go is actually back into the past. We've had other guests on the show who've talked about, for example, with Apache, the original idea with Apache is actually that everybody could have their own server. It said, if we're in a client-server world, great, I'll be the server and not just the client. And we have now is the giant server world where I'm just a user. I'm not even, client is almost too flattering a word for the subordinate state that we're in. And something happened, and I was in a conversation this morning about this, that there was an awful lot of investment and energy in the late 90s, and then even up until about 2005, even after the dot-com crash, in independence for developers, independence for individuals. I don't want to call them just users, because if you're operating a server, you're not just a user, you're an operator. You have your own domain. I've had Searls.com since 1995, and I was probably late with that, But, and blogging was this huge thing, right? I had up to 50,000 readers a day to my blog. I had a newspaper, a daily paper in a way on the web. And then social media came along, and now, everybody's there. A lot of the bloggers fled to there. That's where the action is. And you're working on kind of liberating social networks, but what about the individual, operator who would really want their own space, not just it's not just like we kind of have to break up social media in some way and make social more a thing that's in charge, that the individual's in charge of. But my ability to publish and operate online is not just social. It's publishing. It's being able to operate in e-commerce where I have real independence. And I'm wondering if focusing entirely on social is sort of supports that whole model when we actually need models that favor independence from that.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. The reason we care so much about social, or the reason why you don't have lots and lots of individual blogs with 50,000 daily readers has a lot to do with the way people get to discover things to read and things to engage with. And a lot of that comes through the social sphere, and that's kind of why we start there. One of the things we care a lot about is the way we decide who sees what. And right now, the way you get to see things in a lot of places is controlled by algorithms that you don't really have a lot of insight into. So you visit a website and you get a feed, and the feeds used to just be all the things that your friends published. And now it's a curated feed, and it's curated by a company that is making decisions around what will drive engagement, what will cause you to click on something, to share it, or to reply to it. And that feedback loop of trying to drive engagement has led those algorithms to favor content that riles people up, that gets them angry enough to write something that ends up being somewhat divisive and not unifying. And that's a choice people can make, right? To use those sites, to not use those sites. Those companies can choose those algorithms, can choose different algorithms. But right now, because of the lock-in effect of giant monolithic websites, users are somewhat denied meaningful choices in the algorithmic curation of their feeds. And that leaves little room for small one-off players. It leaves little room for independent operators with audiences to build audiences and not try to game that algorithm. And what we are hoping is that by building infrastructure that allows users to travel, that allows users to select their providers of these services, that allows users to hook up to whatever provider of curation they want, whether that's through a specific website or through a piece of open source code or through some cloud service that's going to help them accomplish that. Giving them a great range of choice hopefully gives them a great range of control over what they see. And my bet is that if we do that, there will be more room. There will be more room for more ways of reaching people. And the websites that you're talking about, the blogs of yesteryear that we used to all read and love, that there will be a little bit more room for that. And they won't all just end up on Medium. They won't all just end up kind of in aggregator websites where that's the only place to go because that's the only place that can drive traffic. If we can drive traffic in ways that are less beholden to the centralized structures we have now, we can create that room. So that's kind of where I hope all of this goes, right? No one cares about infrastructure for the sake of infrastructure. Everyone cares about the effect it has on actual individuals and their daily experience of using the web. And when this stuff reaches the user, because the user is not going to know a lot about the decentralized aspects of this, they're not going to be focused on that. But by the time this bubbles up to the place where it actually is visible to users, the way it's visible, I hope, is that kind of choice, that kind of ability to take control over their own curation, and that kind of ability to say, you know what, I actually want room in my feed for that kind of blog, for that kind of content. And I think we'll get there if we have that freedom from lock-in. I think we start to get a little bit more of that room.
So this is super fascinating. I'm thinking through this, and this idea of aggregation I think is important. To start with, one of the first things that we had as consumers of technology for aggregation was RSS feeds. And those have kind of died off for the most part. They still get used in some places. It's fascinating to me, first off, that the simplest algorithm you can possibly have is the way your RSS feed is presented to you. And that is just all the things that you followed in order of when they were posted. And then, on the extreme opposite side of that, you have the way that Facebook and Twitter and YouTube, for that matter, work these days. And that is, there's this super complicated algorithm that nobody really understands. I think even the engineers of those companies don't really understand all the things that goes on under the hood there. And then you said something that was really fascinating, and it makes me think, what if you could log into Facebook and adjust your homepage algorithm yourself? And the amount of control that would give to a user, that is a fascinating idea. And I'm curious, is that something that you guys are chasing down? Is that kind of the holy grail that you're going for?
Well, I don't know that, logging into Facebook specifically and being able to adjust your feed is anything we have control over. Obviously, we would love to see that happen, but it's not there's no star on my roadmap that says that's where we go, because man, who would I have to convince to make that possible? But that is the dream, is that users can log into the social site that they want to log into and have control over their feed and have a choice of curation methods. That's exactly what we're looking for. And there's a bunch of ways that could happen, right? One is that this protocol achieves some amount of adoption and people start using it, and front ends grow for it and clients grow for it and all that. But there are other paths. There's there's some really good work being done by Daphne Keller on a concept of middleware, where she has mused about regulation kind of winching open the doors on some of the incumbent social networks to have them allow middleware inserted into their process to give users the ability to select the curation algorithms and software and provider. So your vision of this actually happening on Facebook property is definitely in the air for some people. I wouldn't say that that's what we are focused on, but if this proposal that Daphne has, or this idea that Daphne has, sees the light of day in any real way, then we would obviously want to be part of that ecosystem. Some of the same decentralized technology we're building that connects people to each other and helps them navigate curating their feeds could obviously be plugged into the Facebook universe if they were to adopt an open middleware standard of some kind.
So I have a couple of questions, but first I have to let y'all know that this is also sponsored by Club TWiT. Club TWiT is a new thing here at TWiT. You get all the shows ad-free. These are ad-free podcasts. There's a members-only TWiT Plus bonus feed. There's a members-only Discord. You can chat with hosts and producers. There's lots of discussion channels, special events. There are lots of outtakes that run on the bonus feed. It's all cool stuff, and it's only $7 a month. So please check that out. That's at twit.tv/clubtwit. So a question I have, James, is you were talking about, you should be able to choose your algorithms in some ways. And there's this assumption that as it was in the mainframe age, that all serious computing happened only on the mainframe. And that's kind of our assumption about cloud right now. All the serious stuff is going to happen at the big operators, because only they have all this money and only they have all these resources, and only they can run algorithms, and only they could do AI, and only they could do ML, and only they can give you all this other stuff. And we've talked here before briefly, but I'd like your thoughts on it, on what we call palgorithms, which are ones for you and me. I would like to be able to look at, all my property, all of my expenses, all of my health stuff, my truly personal data, not just the social stuff that's out there exposed to the world, but the private stuff that's mine, that can make connections between things in my life that are important, but I may not even know that they're important, or or that this is about to wear out, or that subscription is about to run out, or there might be a better deal in this subscription, or, but run algorithms of our own. And I'm wondering if either you have any thoughts about that, or any work going on in that area.
So the word palgorithm is new to me, but I love it. I don't know if you made that up, but I'm going to use that. Actually, my wife Joyce, who I think is the one who came up with it. She's as usual. Joyce is the brains of the outfit.
No kidding.
Yeah, I mean, we have a problem, which is that a lot of the users we care about are running on phones, so they're not going to do computationally intensive tasks on their phones, just if for battery life reasons, then, more than anything else. Whether you could support those people with, freedom boxes, with cloud infrastructure, with kind of, and by cloud infrastructure, I mean, like cheap VPS infrastructure where you could kind of do this on consumer budgets. I don't know. I mean, distributed algorithms, that's certainly a thing. But I actually think that a lot of the problems we want to solve don't require as much computational power as we currently think, right? ML is getting cheaper, but a lot of problems don't actually require machine learning. A lot of the curation stuff that we want to do could be done with simple keyword searches. Like my email is sorted with keywords. I don't have any complicated artificial intelligent thing working. I see feeds of my email and I can slice and dice it based on topic, based on the things people talk about and who is sending me various emails. And that's actually pretty effective. The chances of us doing meaningful curation and other types of sorting and filtering without a ton of machine learning, I think there's actually a lot of hope for that. And if you give people places to plug in, if you give them the ability to innovate specifically on that question, where they don't have to build the entirety of the rest of the ecosystem, because it's already being built in a decentralized fashion and they can kind of plug in a project just like this, that starts to become a plausible area for research. You could sort of see grad students working on that. You can sort of see hackers working on that. And so I don't know anyone who is currently working on palgorithms. I'm going to keep using that word until I find somebody who decides to work on it. I think that's brilliant. And I think if we want to bring control closer to users, we don't necessarily need to emulate the specific solutions that people have developed to run on big iron. We can identify solutions that are more adapted to running in environments with less RAM, less battery, less computation. And that might be the way to kind of bring stuff closer to users and also to make it more comprehensible, right? Earlier, we mentioned that these algorithms are difficult to understand, and maybe even the engineers who are kind of operating them don't fully understand them. But if we avoid those systems and replace them with things that are lighter weight, those lighter weight things might be easier to understand. So I don't know that we are dependent on artificial intelligence, and I don't know what palgorithms might look like. Maybe they will encompass machine learning, but they could also get pretty far with a lot less. That being said, one of the things that I think we could do in a more decentralized world is provide services where, that computationally expensive thing might be the thing that happens in the cloud, and you buy that as a service, and you're not actually forced to run everything else on that same service. You're not forced to buy all your other social media service from that same provider. The nice thing about giving people lots of ways to hook things up is when they need that kind of complexity, they can go get it. When they need that kind of support, they can go get it. And it doesn't force them to drag the entirety of the rest of their online experience over there. I think that's one of the benefits of decentralization is the ability to pick and choose.
Okay, a couple of things. One is Joyce is texting me saying, as you're speaking, saying, yes, right. and also adding, algorithms can be written with 100 lines of code if it's not on the major platform. So maybe you and she should have a conversation after this, because there's a lot there. So Jonathan, I know you have something in the queue there.
I do. So I discovered something. I think it was just yesterday I saw this. Google, of all people, is going to step in and help us. Google makes something called Coral.ai, and they've got this little USB accelerator. And it is the USB card is a $60 AI accelerator, which makes it perfect for plugging into your Raspberry Pi or your Freedom Box or whatever, old piece of hardware that you've got that you want to run your own server on. And so I'm super excited about this because it under the hood, what it lets you do is it lets you run accelerated TensorFlow without having to have a dedicated GPU or dedicated accelerator card. But that lets you do things like good voice recognition that you control yourself, or some of these other, artificial intelligence, machine learning algorithms that you can actually control yourself. And I'm super excited. Now, unfortunately, because of the year that we live in, this thing is about a year back ordered. So you can't actually get your hands on one right now. But I think this has the potential, this sort of thing has the potential to really fit into this idea of taking control back of some of these things for the people that care. It's one more tool, to give us the ability to do that.
Yeah, that looks fascinating. I actually don't know anything about that product specifically, but I do know that the floor for gaining access to hardware that will run computationally expensive things on GPUs is dropping fast. That's not the only item like that in the marketplace. There are a few others, and there's a whole bunch of folks who are, building tiny little machines with 5 GPUs in them to do a bunch of calculation for them, so that they can do machine learning on a much smaller scale, on a much smaller budget. And I think some of that will continue. Now, the average user is not going to do that, right? The average user isn't going to want to manage a rack of GPU cards. However, the bringing that floor down is one step closer to making it accessible to folks, and driving it towards consumer tech will make it a thing that more people can engage with. And I don't think every user needs to engage with it on themselves. If there is demand for it, eventually somebody will find a way to productize it. And if this Coral AI thing is the, a step in that direction, I completely welcome it. I do think, though, that for a lot of users, tinkering with ML is also pretty hard. Tinkering with AI is also pretty hard. You can teach people how to code. You can teach people how to understand basic macro languages, basic scripting languages pretty well. If you want to give them a little bit of control, you can teach them kind of how to manipulate their environment, and they can be pretty powerful pretty quickly. With machine learning, it is a lot harder, right? The knowledge base is just the knowledge floor is a lot higher. You have to know a lot about statistics. You have to understand what exactly it is that you're getting out of these systems, what the inputs need to look like, and what the outputs you get are worth. And I think that gets harder. So, even in a world where you can kind of get access to machine learning modules that you can just plug into your phone or your Raspberry Pi and never have to maintain it, and imagine the dream of just kind of AI in a box. Even in that world, I think there's some value to this notion of algorithms, this notion of, well, what if the secret is me and my friends, some simple code, and some trust? And what do we get out of that? And that's an experiment that we haven't really done. And it would be fascinating to find out how much functionality could you get out of that, because that would be way more accessible than AI in a box, even if that is a consumer level kind of product.
So I have to ask about the DDoS problem. I'll give a little bit of background on this and then get your thoughts on it. So at least for me, looking at all of these decentralized solutions, one of the big advantages is that you sidestep the censorship problem. And in an ideal world, the way that works is anybody can block any other user if they don't want to hear or are offended by the things that they're said. But that doesn't remove the ability of that person to speak for anyone that wants to listen to them, right? Like that's the dream, as far as I see it, as the dream of the decentralized world. But then you have this situation where if the wrong person really gets ticked off at the speaker, they can just DDoS them, right? They can pay $10 a week to whatever Russian cyber criminal gang they choose to hire, and some botnet comes in and just breaks the IP address where that person is posting from. And so I'm curious, as we talk about trying to be able to move these getting real work done without using the cloud, I think is the way TWiT said it. How does that work with problems like DDoS?
So I'm not sure that, we're getting real work done without using the cloud. I'm not sure I accept that definition, because even in a decentralized world, you're talking about a bunch of stuff living in the cloud, making that all seamless. Peer-to-peer on its own with absolutely no servers has not produced the outputs we wanted. There's going to be some servers. There's going to be some stuff living on cloud somewhere, right? And we don't have to call it the cloud, because I don't really like that term. I don't think it's very descriptive, but at the same time, there's going to be servers, there's going to be services that are running 24/7 on computers that are not mine. And I'm going to consume those services, and they're going to make my life a lot easier. What makes this decentralized is that I can kind of move between those services pretty seamlessly. I can swap them in and out and replace them as I please. And that's, that once you sort of accept that you're living in a world where there are some of these computers out there, you don't have to expose your IP address to potential DDoS attackers in order to participate in the system. And there will certainly be lots of services that are kind of like existing social media services, where you can sign up for an account and just use it, and your experience will look like a current user experience. And yes, that service will know your IP address as you use it, just like Twitter knows your IP address when you log into Twitter. But the people you are speaking to don't ever need to see that information. So I don't think DDoS is quite the problem. I don't think that's quite the threat that we're worried about here.
Okay. I'm trying to decide whether I want to dig further into that. I guess the power of the way you're describing it is, so if you're using one particular instance, I'm going to use Mastodon as the example. I know there is a difference, but it makes it easy to explain kind of my thought process. So you can have a Mastodon account. You can run it on your own server, or you can get an account on somebody else's server. And whoever controls that server is the one that gets to ban accounts. But if you're on a server and you say something to tick the wrong person off, and the server owner refuses to ban the account, then someone can DDoS that server, and your account essentially goes away as a result. And that's kind of the scenario I'm thinking about. I really do not want to go into any real world examples, because no matter who I mention, somebody will be mad at me. But I'm curious. It seems like if that's part of the problem space that you guys are trying to solve, that needs to be part of the problem map that you're thinking about.
Yeah, I mean, my hope is that when you sign up for a service, that one of the standard architectures will be this kind of bring your own storage mechanism, will be this notion that you can take your account and move it to a different server quite seamlessly. And so DDoSing the server on which you happen to be speaking today won't silence you. It might require you to, flip a switch to have a different service be the gateway for your access to the network. But I don't want to live in a world where DDoSing the server you happen to use is the magic bullet. Every service we use should have ways for users to exit, not just with their data intact, but with their ID within the social universe intact. And you should be able to take that to a different service, a different provider, and log in and start doing your thing, start speaking. So DDoS in that situation, I think could be used for revenge on a specific server if they're serving a lot of people that you disagree with, but it shouldn't actually be sufficient to silence anybody.
All right,
and that account portability is kind of that is the major thing that I think matters here, right? We talk a lot about portability, and usually we mean data portability, but account portability, identity portability is, I think, even more important.
I have a question that actually Jonathan brought up, or maybe it was you. I don't know. It doesn't matter which. It was about the unavailability of some things because they're all back ordered, and the problem is supply chain. Like, supply chain is the answer to every problem right now. It's like, oh yeah, it's the supply chain. I actually retweeted something yesterday. Somebody said, why did Facebook fall down? Oh, it was supply chain. Of course, it wasn't. But that's sort of an all-purpose blame. But here's what I'm wondering is whether in the fully distributed world you're trying to build, there might be better ways in that for countless dispersed actors in a marketplace or in a society, which a marketplace is, to overcome some of these problems that are kind of systematic, but actually don't have like one big company in charge of it all. You have to kind of improvise your way through it. There's a shortage of containers. Where are they? There's, is there a master list of containers? Does everybody know what those are? What I heard that a retailer is chartering planes right now to carry goods out of Asia that aren't getting onto ships. Christmas is coming up, and a lot of stuff isn't going to be here. But I'm just wondering whether the architecture that you're working on, which is basically focused on social, but could have these other secondary, tertiary uses, that might solve some other problems. I wonder if you thought about that.
So, the architecture we're working on is social, but it connects to a lot of decentralized pieces that could be assembled in other ways. So one of the things that we've been thinking a lot about is the W3C pod work. And the notion behind that is that users kind of can have their own pod storage. It's a place where they can write, they can delegate authority to read, they can delegate authority to write, and all of that can happen in
solid,
structured
right?
ways. Solid,
Tim
yeah,
Berners-Lee's
exactly.
solid thing. Yeah, I just want to make sure it's
exactly.
clear. Yeah, go. Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah.
And the notion is that if you can kind of define structured ways to read and write that are standard for certain data types, and you can define access controls that allow you to intelligently say who can see what, you can have a pod that contains a bunch of information that you can then take wherever you need to take. But more importantly, you have a provider neutral way to access a bunch of data, to share a bunch of data. And so we have supply chain issues. We have some of those are physical manufacturing issues. Some of those are COVID related issues. There's so many reasons why we are currently having supply chain issues. But one of the things that we don't really have is an easy way to share information that allows you to kind of reroute around a lot of these problems. We don't have nimble ways to gather a bunch of data from a bunch of different domains that cuts across a lot of the silos. And if we had that, I wonder if there would be ways that we could find, efficiencies, points of acceleration, solutions. I don't think you could solve the entire supply chain problem, but there might be individual coordination issues that could be addressed and could be fixed if you had access to the data in new ways. And so, that's not a thing that we are building, but that's a thing that the W3C has been working on. And I think as those sorts of technologies start to become more popular, that we will start to see analytical tools that are designed to kind of sit between all of these decentralized data points. We will start to see analytical tools that are designed to collect data from many places, make it visible in aggregate ways, and then let you dive deep into it. And maybe that's part of the solution, is just kind of being able to understand the world using tools that are not confined to any one specific database, one specific provider's set of knowledge and information.
Well, the midpoint of the hour, but the bottom of the show, and I want to get one more question in, and that is, I want to ask you about bridges. Technically speaking, so as we're trying to move people from the old locked-in solutions, like let's say Twitter, to something new, something built on this technology or Mastodon, part of the Fediverse, one of the solutions I see people use is various bridges where they send one message out and their client, their bridge, automatically shoots it to both services. And I'm curious what your thoughts are on that, whether that's a viable solution to kind of bootstrap the next version of social that is federated the way that we think it should be, or is that possibly causing more harm than good? What are your thoughts?
I love bridges. I mean, I do think that you need to give people lots of ways to move. You need to give people lots of paths to adoption. And I know that some people think bridges are not doing the job because they prevent people from just entirely leaving the old service. And if they're still kind of making their content available, their tweets available on Twitter, even though they're now spending a lot of their time on Mastodon, they're not actually giving anyone on Twitter a reason to kind of come across to the new service. But I tend to disagree with that. People go where the interaction is, they go where the messages are, and they'll go where you're actually spending your time. So I'm not too worried about that effect. At the same time, I think people need a reason to move, and that reason to move is not going to be, oh, this person left and they left me behind. The reason to move is not going to be, I never see that person anymore. Once you kind of disappear from somebody's social universe, you start to recede into the distance. And I've seen this happen, right? I used to be on Facebook. I'm no longer on Facebook. And I have a bunch of friends who I used to only talk to on Facebook because we don't live in the same area anymore, and we talk a lot less. It's not like we moved to a new platform. And that's a hard choice for a lot of people. Forcing people to make that choice to completely leave an environment, I don't think that makes your service more attractive to the average user. And I think some people will kind of go along with it, but most people won't. And so bridges are a huge part of the landscape for me. And the more of them, the better. The more we give people the ability to kind of break lock-in, even in small ways. And bridges generally don't work that well, right? They're a kind of a degraded user experience. The more opportunities we give people to even have that, the better we are. It is the first step towards a richer experience of really having full interoperation. And so anything we can do to move people down that path, I think, is a service. And I refuse to hold anybody hostage.
I have a quick, short question that has to do with money. Right now, there's not a lot of money going. The assumption is, there are a couple of assumptions. One is that, and they're sort of near and dear to our constituency here. One is that the age of the independent developer is kind of over, especially if you're a programmer. You're going to make a lot of money if you work for one of these big companies or one of the hot startups, but the hot startups are all going toward business and not necessarily toward personal independence. And the other is that there's just not money available for anything but B2B. No C2B, no, C2C, as it were. But you're in an environment where actually there's some funding going on, and I'm wondering if you have optimism about that. If you're optimistic about getting money to independent developers in one way or another.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the question is not who gets paid, like how do we pay individual developers? For me, the question is how do we make sure there's enough resources coming into the system so that the things we need get built by whoever is going to build them. And some of that stuff will get built by individual developers. Some of that stuff will get built by small dev shops. Some of that stuff might end up getting built by larger outfits. So I'm not too worried about the how do we pay individual developers problem. That said, I believe that if we are living in a world where we have decentralized a bunch of communications, there will be many different entry points, many different places to build things. And you don't have to build an entire giant monolithic stack in order to play in this world. In fact, it will be optimal to build in smaller ways that plug in and do specific things. And that opens up the possibility that you can do things on a smaller scale of resources, that you can do things on the level of an individual developer. How that gets paid for, how that developer kind of designs a sustainability model for that work, whether it's volunteer, whether it's a business, a service business, or what, I think it's too early to say. But there will definitely be room in a decentralized ecosystem for smaller individual players. With all of that said, I know that there are increasingly folks who are looking to do, bounty programs for features, who are looking to do, grant awards for specific interop capability. So all of that stuff that is kind of swirling around the decentralized world that people want to see as functionality that gets built is currently kind of being funded, by people who have made some money on cryptocurrency. And so they're starting to think about what can we buy, what can we fund with that fortune that we've just made, and how can we move things in a decentralized direction with that funding. So I think we're starting to see more of these grant programs come online, and a lot of those really are aimed at individual developers, right? If you look at the model of grants for the web, for example, that really is not a come bring us a giant corporate budget and we'll build enterprise scale things. That is a come all you individual groups and small organizations that want to do something with this technology that takes it forward, and we'll try to figure out a way to help you make that possible. So there's definitely a movement towards trying to figure out how to build the new stuff, and it is aimed at a level, it is pitched at a level that should be more amenable to individual developers and small groups of developers outside of an enterprise context.
Well, we have reached the bottom of the hour here, and we normally have like 4 questions we ask at the end of that, and you've actually covered one of them, which is blockchain. We always have that's sort of a control question. Do you have anything to say about that? But you've sort of touched that. I mean, most of your work actually depends on blockchain, right? In one way or another.
Well, I think a chunk of the work I do at Open Tech Strategies does touch blockchain. The DSNP, we like to say that it's not a blockchain project. It is a technology project that uses some blockchain tech. It does a little bit of blockchain stuff where we think it'll make life easier, but a lot of what it's going to do will not live on the chain. A lot of the things that it's going to do are going to take place in other structures. So we're trying to be judicious about where we apply blockchain technology, because obviously once you're in that world, you have to accept a bunch of constraints. You're operating in a less efficient domain where you're trying to squeeze things onto structures that fit on the chain and stuff like that. So from my perspective, I think blockchain is a promising technology in lots of different areas, and we are using it in DSNP where we feel like there's a real benefit for user autonomy. But as with all things, I don't think blockchain is going to be the answer to every question that people ask. And I have unfortunately seen projects where that is the answer to every question asked, and we're trying very hard not to be that kind of project.
Well, that's great. So a couple of quick ones. What are your favorite text editor and scripting language?
My favorite text editor, I guess, is Emacs, but I run it with an overlay that makes it behave like Vim. So I guess I sit somewhere in between those two worlds.
Is that a named overlay that
I think it's called Evil Mode. So I run Emacs with Evil
That's
Mode.
Great. The VI is an evil.
Yeah.
That's cool.
And it gets me those nice navigation and movement keys that the VI users love, but it also gets me kind of all the power of Emacs, and having both in one place has been pretty good for me. We'll see how the editor wars shake out. I don't think they're over yet. I think there's still a lot of battle left to be fought. Yeah, and my favorite scripting language, I guess, is Python. I've probably written more Python code in the last decade than anything else. And it has become my go-to for all kinds of small things. I reach for it pretty much every day to get tiny little tasks done.
Well, this has been a great hour, and you're making all kinds of progress too. I think you can't do as many things as you do and not have it happen in at least some of those areas. And we'll have to have you back on to talk about some of those.
I'd love it.
As soon as we can. So thanks a lot for being on the show.
Thank you. It's been great to be here, and it's just really great to have this kind of conversation and to talk about decentralization. And I did all the talking, but I know that you actually know a ton about this subject. So hopefully we can sit down and chew it over sometime.
Not as much as you do, man. But that's great. So Jonathan, how is that for you, dude?
Oh, it's fascinating. As I said at the top of the show, I care a lot about this. There are too many times when the fact that we have one big company that controls, Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, even, you name it, these services that are really great for people, but you run into such problems because you have a big company that controls them, and that company has interests, and they have different things that they care about, and the things that company cares about may be different than what the users care about. And so any of these projects that can give that power back to the users, I think is great. It's interesting to see the demand for it. One of the big questions with every time we cover something like this, one of the big questions is how many people actually care. And it's great to see that some of these projects are also thinking about that. How do we make this work even if 90% of the people in the world don't care? And that, in some ways, that's probably the more important conversation to be having.
Yeah, I think people don't care often because they don't know. They don't know how could you care about something you don't know about? And I think a theme on this show and a theme for our constituency is that an awful lot of what brought the net here in the first place we've forgotten about, and it's, it's old hat. There's a lot of stuff that's old hat and been forgotten, but and decentralization, distributed computing, all that stuff, self-reliance, a lot of this stuff has just not been on the table for a long time, but could be. I mean, I think losing Facebook for a few hours yesterday was a little bit of a wake-up call, or at least it was entertaining, at least for a while. But I mean, it speaks to the fallibility of giants, I mean, they stub their toes and the whole world has to cope with that. But they do, I
tell people quite a bit, you talk about the cloud. Somebody in IRC said, who first said this, and I don't remember who it was, but the cloud is just a fancy term for somebody else's computer. And that means that any intern that works there can trip over the power cable and bring everything down, which is essentially what happened to Facebook yesterday.
Yeah, that's pretty much. I mean, the terrible thing was somebody did that.
Yes.
A person did that. That was a human error. Oh yes. No! Don't be that person. Anyway, so give us what you need to plug, and I'll do our plug as well.
Okay, I've got two things that I will plug. The first one is you need to get on TWiT Plus because we have the Untitled Linux show every Saturday, right? Saturday afternoon, and you should be there. You should listen to it. You should get on the feed. There. Yes,
I'll be there.
It'd be great to have you along.
Send me reminders, people, because I've got so tied up. But go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll try to do that. And then the other thing I'll feed is over at hackaday.com. I write the occasional article and have the security column, and that goes live every Friday morning. And of course, we'll be covering. I'll probably talk about the Facebook thing a bit. There's another big piece of news. If you happen to be on the latest version of Apache and you have CGI bin enabled, you have a devastatingly trivial RCE, remote code execution, right now. You need to go look at this. You go look at the latest Apache vulnerability. It's really bad. And we'll be talking about that on Friday too.
Wow. Okay. So I need to let you know that next week we have Mary Hodder on as a guest. And we're going to talk about construction. She's a real authority and has been living with this for a long time. And open source and construction. How does open source fit into the construction world? Interesting topic. Anyway, she'll be on next week. And hope to see you then. It's been a great show. And we'll see you next week.
So you got yourself the brand new latest and greatest iPhone or Samsung smartphone because you heard about all of the beautiful photography those things can create. But for some reason, you're just not quite getting it done when you try to make your photos. Or you got yourself a brand new camera because you were interested in getting started in photography, but your little new inexpensive camera still isn't quite cutting it. Well, you need to check out my show, Hands-On Photography, here on TWiT. I'm going to show you how to be a better photographer and a better post-processor, and quite frankly, just help you get the most out of that new camera that's either on your phone or the brand new one that you just got for your birthday or gifts or what have you. And it's going to be a lot of fun. So head on over to twit.tv/hop. That's twit.tv/HOP and subscribe today.